Hello, and welcome to another episode of the TRC podcast. This is episode 12. My name is Jake. With me is my partner in crime, Ryan of RJM Analytics, our head statistician and analyst, and our guest for this week is David from our community. We'll let him formally introduce himself in a minute, but first, I want to do a bit of cleanup here. We didn't have an episode last week, obviously. As I said last time we were on the air, we're on kind of a play-it-by-ear basis rather than a set weekly one, and for a variety of reasons. In week's case, Ryan was busy, and we didn't have a guest available for it, so we didn't do a show. Now, we did have one particular person take issue with this on Twitter, and look, I don't want this to be a thing on our program where we constantly bite back at the haters or whatever, especially considering that our last episode had something to do with that already. I think we all agree here that that's annoying and it's pretentious when people do that, and that's not what we're about here. But I just simply wanted to address a specific criticism and point out why it's wrong. Now, as it turned out, this individual was just a person from our past that had some kind of axe to grind with us, I guess. But in case anyone else might have been listening to this show and wondered the same thing, I wish to set the record straight. Now, I won't speak for my colleagues here, but it's safe to say that I dislike Kevin Harvick. I dislike him the most out of any driver in the Cup Series right now, and I feel pretty secure in saying I dislike him the most out of anyone in our community. Nonetheless, he is a legend. He's a great race car driver. He deserves credit for his recent success. Winning back-to-back races in a season with as much parity as this one has had is a major accomplishment. That's nothing to sneeze at. It is true that I dislike basically everything about his persona, and I consider him to be the guy that represents the worst traits of NASCAR from the 2000s, which, as I pointed out, was the most egotistical era of race car drivers in history. And I stand by my comments in the previous episode about him and Denny Hamlin being like the last remaining holdovers from, I guess, what I would call the snowflake era of NASCAR. But the fact remains, in spite of that, he is a great driver who's earned his success. He didn't bullshit his way into it or luck his way into anything. He earned it, and he deserves his credit. I was fully willing to do this episode and this show last week, but unlike what this commenter was implying, our not doing a show had nothing to do with his win at Michigan. And this week is just further testament to that. We were busy, we couldn't do it, and that's that. Now, having said all that, he did win these last two races. I may say a thing or two about it later if we get the chance, but I'm not the analytical person anyways, and I don't have a real desire to talk that much about Kevin Harvick winning, seeing that he is my least favorite driver. So I'll hand it off now to my guys. Maybe at some point, whichever one of you want to go first, we can let David introduce himself or whatever, and then you guys can talk about whatever topic you want to, because, we didn't have a show last week, which means we can kind of go several different ways with this. Mm-hmm. So just say what's on your mind.
Since last week, apparently the reason we didn't have an episode was because Kevin Harvick won. I think we should probably be making up for lost time here by talking about Kevin Harvick, which is to say that I think the amount of recency bias that I've seen over this past day, from, all of a sudden people saying he might be a championship contender or the championship favorite, I'm like, where did this come from all of a sudden? Let's take a moment to get back to reality here. I mean, obviously, him winning back-to-back races is impressive, and the fact that he's doing it with a Stewart-Haas racing team that has not been very good this year. Yeah, let's look at over the course of the full season, Kevin Harvick is 14th in ETDR and has .66 expected wins. So, yeah, the past two races have been obviously very clutch wins for him, but the fact of the matter is that, you can't really count on that being something to be sustained into the playoffs. especially considering this is generally the part of the season where um, guys who've been dominating all year will kind of, maybe go through the motions a little bit and not not lead a whole lot. Chase Elliott had a terrible run at Michigan, and last week at Richmond, that was just a weird race from what I saw. That I wasn't able to watch it live, but it seemed like there was just so much movement throughout the field from who was good at the start of the race to at the end, and so yeah, again, props to Harvick for coming on strong at the end at both those races. I guess Michigan was more fortuitous with Hamlin having a penalty and then just Logano doing whatever he did on the restart. But yeah, let's pump the brakes a little bit on the whole championship contender talk. So yeah, unless you're Tony Stewart in 2011, nobody goes from being a 15th place driver pretty much all year to just magically flipping on a light switch and then winning the title. And I'm just not seeing where any of this is coming from.
Yeah.
Yeah, why don't you introduce yourself now, David?
Oh, yeah. Well, glad to be here. So, as the fine gentlemen have said, my name is David. That is actually my real name. So, but yeah, I've been a part of this community that with these guys for quite some time. I started posting on Racing Reference, which is sort of the genesis of this community around. Let's see, I guess it was mid to late 2012, and I've been a part of it ever since. There's been times I've been away, but so yeah, that's been most of the time that I've been watching NASCAR. Now I've been watching NASCAR since 2007, and I didn't start as the way Ryan did with watching the 2007 Daytona 500. Although I certainly wish I had. That was quite the race. But I remember very distinctly. Well, actually, I remember distinctly watching a race, several years before, but I don't remember which one it was. But 2007, I remember watching a few races. I very much remember Talladega, Spring Talladega 2007 and 2007 Darlington. Of course, both of which races were won by Jeff Gordon, and for which reason he became my favorite driver. I do remember 2007 Darlington, Jeff Gordon having the overheating issue with his engine and pushing water at the end. So that was kind of a very vivid moment, very impressionable moment, or a moment that was very striking for me as an impressionable youth. So. So that was the kind of things I remember. And in 2008, I watched more, and then 2009 was my first attempt to watch the Daytona 500. Didn't quite work. Of course, that year the 500 wasn't much of a race anyway. But so no, it wasn't. But I did. The very first 500 I did watch was the next year, 2010, and that was quite the race. And that was, by that time I was hooked, right? I was very much watching. I was following, if not watching, all the races in 2009. Now I've been, over the years, and the guys know me for saying this, maybe ad nauseum, but I've never, I'm from the part of the country where you're out in the country and you don't, if you don't have cable and you just have antenna, it's not. But what little channels you do get sometimes don't come in all that well. So the only races I was ever able to watch for the majority of my getting into NASCAR were the ones on Fox and, for a few years ABC. But then, sometimes, you turn on TV on Sunday and then they just don't show up. So basically what I'm getting at is that a lot of the races I've been watching or I've been following have been, online or on the radio. So the number of races I've actually watched on TV have been comparatively few compared to these other guys. So, but regardless, it hasn't quenched my interest in the sport, and it's been a lot of fun watching over these years. So, but that's kind of how it's been. There's been a few periods in my fandom where my interest has kind of been lean, to say the least. I remember in 2015, I was there was kind of a period where I just wasn't keeping track. over during the summer months. And then I realized, well, hey, this is Jeff Gordon's last year. I gotta follow this because I'm never going to have this opportunity again. Well, little did I know that he'd come back the next year, but I digress. But watching 2015 Homestead was certainly an experience with Jeff Gordon making the championship four, and have that one restart where he took the lead on like a 3 wide pass or however it actually happened. That was very exciting. It felt like my last hurrah, as having a real driver to pull for. But yeah, it was. But ever since Jeff Gordon retired, I've kind of pumped the brakes on having one particular driver that I really pull for, and just kind of trying to watch the races objectively. So I don't have a driver that I certainly don't have a driver that I really dislike above all others. I certainly have drivers that I don't care much for, and and sometimes they do align with the other unpreferences of the other guys, but as far as drivers I pull for nowadays, it's kind of more just Hendrick Motorsports in general, because Chase Elliott, because he's Jeff Gordon's successor more or less. William Byron, because he now drives the 24. Kyle Larson, because he's just really really good, and I think he's he's a rising star. I mean that's underselling it. Really, he's a champion now, but he's going to be on top for many years to come. And then Alex Bowman, who is, though maybe not as flashy as some of the others, certainly a very solid, underrated driver. But yeah, so that's in brief. Yeah. Sorry, what'd you say?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's in brief. Basically, I got into it.
I think you predate both of us on Racing Reference, right?
Yeah, I believe so.
You were there before me, and
David just predates me on there, because I started commenting regularly on there in 2013, and he was on there, I think, in early to mid 2012, because I remember the guys used to always remark how he was the youngest guy there when he was like 13. Yeah, when he was 13, I think when he first started posting on there. So he was just before our time, and we used to get to see him a lot more often, because I know that he's more busy with his life right now. But it was a treat when he was on there. Like, he came in with the wave that kind of like the long shot, or Alex did, and then I came in shortly after that.
Yeah, the real OGs among our whole community are Adam and Sean, who've been there for since the 2000s. So
those were the for sure.
And I'll try not to
enjoy that.
Yeah, I'll try not to be too intrusive here, but one question I do want to ask you is, I may have this confused with something else, but I seem to remember you used to be very into stat keeping and sort of like analytics like stuff yourself when it came to racing. Of course, I might be confusing that with like the legendary HTML stuff.
He was the one who was always posting those David Smith statistics.
That's right.
I remember one time somebody asked him, "Are you David Smith?"
Yeah, that's right. So I'm glad you brought this up. I should have mentioned this, but yeah, I mean, the whole point of this podcast is advanced statistics, and I've been very much into that for a long time, but I guess more into it earlier than as of late. Like, as of late, I've just been more of a consumer of other people's labors rather than trying to come up with anything myself. The thing that I really liked to do in those days was just come up with alternate point systems, and that's fun as far as it goes. But then you realize it only has a very limited utility. Like, it's good to see, right? Like, it's good to see how a certain combination of finishes plus lap sled plus whatever you score points for would rank, among other hypotheticals in a certain situation. But then you realize, if this point system was actually in place, people would just be driving differently. So, so I'm just going to go on the record, and I've done this in the chat too, maybe, I don't know, but diehard Jeff Gordon fan, I will be the one to admit that no, we do not know that Jeff Gordon would have won 7 championships in 2004, 2007, 2014 if we hadn't had the chase. Now, I'm not saying that he wouldn't have, but I'm sure Ryan is very happy to hear me say this, but it's like, I mean, we just don't know, guys. Like, we can't go back and change history. I don't like the chase either, but it's here to stay. We may as well enjoy it.
Yeah, and I think I will kind of tee off on that. You really set up something I wanted to talk about, which was the old seasons that I've been compiling data for lately. I've been going in two different directions with it because of the about a year ago, before we started all this, I had already gotten a bunch done, and then I made a bunch of big changes to the formula because I thought there were a lot of inconsistencies with various stuff, and it wasn't rewarding. I guess it wasn't rewarding drivers who were on bad teams enough for overachieving. So yeah, I've been going from 2005 forward, and then also from present day backwards at the same time. And one of the just today actually had 2018 or 2017 finished, which no surprise, Martin Truex absolutely dominated. Was actually higher had a higher ETDR score than Kyle Larson did last year, which I think was a little bit surprising to me. But considering that I think Larson had some really bad races last year too, like basically every plate race and that first Richmond race, Truex just like had maybe one bad race the entire year. It was I forgot where it was. It might have been okay. It was Sonoma because he blew an engine. And he had like a 28th place average running position. Other than that, he like didn't have any other races with anything worse than 20th, and it was like only 3 or 4 of them outside the top 10. Yeah, David, if you want to go ahead and talk more about that first,
sure.
then I can
up. Yeah. So I made a the other guys made a reference to David Smith earlier, and this has been kind of a recurring topic on this podcast, as many episodes I've listened to. But yeah, it's certainly I am not David Smith of Motorsports Analytics. I am not as intelligent as he is, and not as observant as he is, and certainly not as industrious as he is. However, that was one of the things that back in let's see, I don't remember when he started his whole thing, but I think I discovered it probably circa 2012 or so, probably around the same time as I started posting on Racing Reference. But it was sort of a kind of a revelation for me personally, because I had heard of sabermetrics in baseball before, and that's, I mean, baseball was a sort of was a sport where I watched it a little bit, even played some growing up, but that was not nearly as much as my interest in NASCAR. So the his was the first thing, the first like sort of quasi mainstream outside of our niche on Racing Reference, where there was any sort of attempt at advanced statistics. And so for that, much like some of these other guys, some of these other guys, it's he is to be credited. David Smith is to be for kind of blazing the trail in a sort of a mainstream way of this statistic. But right, but
Sean pretty much was inspired from him for a lot of his stuff, and then he was who kind of got both Adam and I into this. So yeah.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. And of course, don't want to discredit Sean at all, who's been on this podcast, and Adam, of course, they've done fine work. But David Smith was just the one that was just actually out there and doing it. But oh yeah, I was going to say oh yeah, that was the other thing. Anecdotally, my now defunct Twitter account was started exclusively to just ask David Smith questions and pester him on Twitter, and I'm sure he got real sick of me within the first month or so, because I was constantly asking him questions about how does this work, but I really wanted to know how PEER worked, performance and equal equipment rating. But as you know, as the stats-minded fans who listen to this know, that it's a quote proprietary unquote statistic. So there was no explanation was forthcoming, and while I do appreciate some of his other statistics, here was kind of, I mean, I just kind of took his word for it and said, okay, this is probably about accurate. I'm sure he knows what he's doing, but as the years pass, you find that the numbers that he comes up with for Pierre don't really wear well with time, and then you think, I'm not sure this is true. This is driver A really that much better than driver B in equal equipment, and so you just kind of wonder what was going into it, and I think he would have stood to benefit a lot if he'd had um, let's see here, if he'd had some sort of transparency with that statistic. And that's it's kind of a shame. But now that his website is gone now, it's like you think that there's nothing really holding him back from just kind of revealing it. But I'm sure he has his reasons.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway,
it's just such a nearly impossible thing to quantify, though.
Yeah.
So like, even with what I do, I guess I have my my one statistic for over or underachieving, just basically average running position compared to the team average running position. But even that's like, obviously it penalizes drivers like Alex Bowman who have great teammates, and it rewards drivers like Kevin Harvick who are clearly a lot better than their teammates. And so it's like, there's just in ETDR, the equipment component is 20% of that. The other 80% is passing and running position and speed and just whatever else leading. So I mean, it equalizes it somewhat, but there's just no perfect answer for it. It's
right. That's the thing with statistics, right? You have to as the guys have said on here before, no number is going to perfectly quantify what you see on track. But the whole goal of this, this venture into statistics is to try and quantify what you are seeing and to maybe discover things that you aren't. And that's why
I wrote about that a bit last week. That I think there's a lot of misconceptions out there that analytics is trying to be like trying to create these objective numbers that you have to take as the gospel. That you have a certain number for how a driver did, then that's absolutely how it is. But I mean, you can't look at it that way. The same way you can't look at top tens or average finish as this be all end all thing, because there's so many different ways you can just classify all this data to suit whatever you're trying to look for, and it's just a lot of times it will leave stuff unanswered. The way I look at it really is just a more advanced, a more precise perspective on ordinary numbers. But I mean, even still, there's no such thing as a perfect statistic.
Yeah, I agree. And so the last bit I wanted to mention, this is where what I was leading up to is that. So I did get kind of a reputation on Racing Reference was for as the guy said, I was once asked if I was David Smith of Motorsports Analytics because I used my subscription to Motorsports Analytics to actually. I guess I was basically stealing his advanced statistics there behind the paywall. I mean, I wasn't doing all of them, but it was just like, and I was putting them. I was putting them on the like at least the top 10 in Pure, like on the race comments page every week, and I just saw it. The only reason I ever did anything like that was just to kind of stimulate discussion, but that probably 7 times out of 10 it didn't really work, and it was just people just kind of brushed by it. But it was, but the seeds which have been sown in those days have now borne great fruit in this age, and I hope that what David Smith started and what we are continuing and what Sean started, to be fair to him, of course, I don't mean to demean him, but David Smith and Sean started in both of their ways, and what we are continuing, or what you guys are continuing, I hope that it will be carried into the future. So it's really quite a good time to be into advanced statistics and being a NASCAR fan right now.
I prefer to think
even
of
if
it
a lot of even if people on Twitter don't see it,
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think that's you have to look on the positive side of that, which is that this community just has so much room to grow. I mean, we are very much behind, I think, where other sports are in terms of mean, with football, you have PFF, Pro Football Focus, that comes out with all sorts of ratings like this. Obviously, baseball has been, they were really the first ones to do it with all that Moneyball stuff, the sabermetric.
Moneyball blew my mind when I watched that movie. Actually, I believe no, I watched the movie first, then I read the book, and that was crazy. That was like I thought that was the coolest thing ever, and it artificially boosted my interest in baseball for quite some time after that.
Yeah,
But like
I mean,
yeah.
Like, I barely have ever paid much attention to baseball. Maybe for like 1 month in 2019 when the Nats won the World Series, and now they're dead to me after they traded away their whole team. So I don't care at all anymore. But it's like, yeah, I love that movie, and I think that's really what got all this stuff off the ground in sports in general. And
Yeah, I was gonna say
hockey has all kinds of advanced stuff, and then I think racing, though, yeah, it's really just this very small kind of niche thing with, you have David Smith, and then other than that, it's like there's no most well-known stuff outside of that is just whatever NASCAR does with like driver rating, and so
driver rating is not bad. I mean, I want to say some things later about well, I mean, the problems with driver rating have been well documented before, but I do want to actually bring this up later when we talk a little bit more about Harvick and his newfound championship contender status, apparently, allegedly. But anyway, sorry, lost my train of thought there. Sorry.
Forgot what I was going to say actually.
I'll just step in just to say that Moneyball is one of my all-time favorite movies too, because it's. I'm not a big baseball person either, and I'm not a stat head either, at least not in the sense that you guys are. That's probably my second favorite movie of the 2010s. That's just an amazing movie that never gets old. And as far as what David said about David Smith, the things he did, like he deserves credit for what he's done and what he kind of started. But I prefer to kind of think of what Sean and then us have done since then is like improving on that. Like he deserves credit for starting something, but I feel like what we do is is better. But we're obviously biased on that front, and I'm biased on that front. But that's how I look at it personally.
Right. So what I remembered was what I was going to say. The thing is with racing, and a lot of this is just kind of inherent to the way it's covered. It's just that with baseball, actually baseballs, I would venture to suggest that baseball is so advanced with advanced statistics and sabermetrics is because it's essentially a sort of play-by-play. I guess it's sort of like football in that way, except football is on a timer. It has a clock, whereas baseball doesn't. It just the game can theoretically take as long as as long as they want. It's I mean, to my knowledge, there isn't a pitch clock in MLB, although there might be. I don't know.
But just for me to just interject just a second, I promise I'll let you go. The thing about that is that I will say it's the sport that's most conducive to that kind of thing because one, I think it's the sport where like in two different ways where athleticism means the least. That doesn't mean that it doesn't matter because it does, but compared to other sports, I would looking at history. I mean, let's
contact sport.
Let's just be real. Let's look at some of the guys that have been really great in MLB history. A lot of these guys are not necessarily been in shape.
Portola, Colon.
Yeah. But on top of that, you have the fact that one player accounts for a very small amount of a team's success. Like we've talked about this before. Like as great, however cheated up it might have been, for how great Barry Bonds was, in his prime when he was playing, the Giants only ever came close to winning the championship one time when he was playing there, all those years. Yeah. Like, theoretically, he could have hit 1,000, hit a home run every time that he came up at bat for an entire season, and the Giants could have never won a game. In theory, that would be possible in the game of baseball. So for those two different reasons, I think it lends itself to being most conducive to, like, so they say, using a computer to help you have more success. It's harder to do that, but not impossible. But it's harder to, I think, apply those principles to other things like, football and basketball that are more athletic, and one or two players can have more of a effect on a macro level within the game and like change the game and make plays. But that's I like the principle of it when it comes to anything, but there's just something special about baseball that I think just makes it more applicable, if that makes sense.
If I might jump in, actually, that you said something that kind of got me to thinking. Baseball, very much unlike football, for example. You say each player it contributes to such a small part of the team, and that's true, because with baseball, every player except for the pitcher now, unfortunately, and across both leagues, but every player is going to go up to the plate. Each player needs to be at least a semi decent batter, And I mean, some players can get away with not being good batters, but they don't usually last long as far as these things go. But football, there's only a subset of players on the team that are going to be running into the end zone, scoring touchdowns, or whatever. And then they have a certain, and I don't watch football at all, but I'm just like, I'm saying this because just broad strokes, right? But like special teams, they bring out a whole different set of players who are paid to just kick field goals or extra points and such. With racing, but the point I was going to make earlier is that racing is not nearly as easily as observable as baseball and football. This has been mentioned before, right? With baseball, when I said that it's a play-by-play sport, it's that you can watch it on TV and pretty much catch pretty much everything that's going on. Football, same thing. Basketball, it's a little bit more fluid, kind of like football. Basketball, you can also kind of have pretty much everyone shooting shots, but usually you try to get it to the one guy who's going to shoot the best shots. Right, but with and I don't know really how much about hockey, but with racing, obviously it's quote individual sport. It's not really, but there's so much that you miss when the TV is not focused on. When the TV is not focused on, there's always passes being made. In the average race, you might not see it, but it's there. So you have to rely on a lot of numbers that are given to you after the fact. If a lot of fans, which a lot of fans don't even do because it's not, loop data for NASCAR has only been around since 2005. So the majority of NASCAR's history, you don't have passing the statistics or quality passes or whatever in the paper the day after the race. So that's just not a part of the culture, right? So you just kind of with racing, you just kind of take what's given to you, even when you're at the track, like I was last week at Michigan. By the way, I was at the race last week at Michigan, one of two Cup races that I've ever been to, the other being Kansas in 2010. You can still easily miss incidents, just like that. I've been to IRP, which was also 2 weeks ago. I've been to two NASCAR races in the last month, and that's probably like the only ones I'll be at for like the next 5 years. But I digress. Even at IRP, you can miss, which is just over half a mile, less than 3/4. You can still miss stuff, and so it's racing is just sort of chaotic. Isn't really the word I want to use, but it's more of just constant action.
I think the overarching point here, I guess we've been trying to make, is that everybody is trying to do the same thing. Every driver,
right. That's exactly it.
Sort of similar to baseball, except it's going on all at the same time. Like basketball, football, hockey, you all have your designated star players or star positions who do the important stuff, and then you have other guys who are more like structural guys who do all the little things and take more of a backseat in terms of scoring the goals or the touchdowns or the baskets or whatever. But racing, it's everybody has the same objective. Everybody has the goal is the same. And what's different though is that not everybody has the same outside factors that contribute to their race. And that's what's really important about all this is just that you try to take that into account as much as possible. And I think, obviously the objective is to win or to finish well at least to get points. But
right.
I think it's another. I feel like people misunderstand about analytics is we're not trying to devalue that and claim that winning and finishing isn't important. It's just that it often will not be. It often there's a lot of randomness involved in it, and it's just not usually sustainable if you're getting very lucky with your finishes.
Yeah, it's
like I'm not. Yeah. I would never try to argue in a million years that the champion should just be based on analytics, or that the results of a race should be whoever had the best average running position should win the race. But is
right.
It's trying to discover trends with who ideally can actually sustain winning a lot or leading a lot or finishing well a lot.
Racing is just another difference. It's everyone against everyone every week, right?
Mm-hmm.
And part-time drivers, those are never the thing. But there's really no other sport that's like that. And so when Dale Earnhardt says second is just the first loser, there's a lot of truth to that. Except for some some teams who don't realistically think that they're going to win, but they're out there to just finish as good best they can. You still have, especially this year, where the parity is through the roof. You have like 15 to 20 drivers who are out there on the track, at least who are out there on the track with the goal to win. And so it's you have drivers talking about good points days, and I'm glad just as much as the next fella that we have points being awarded for in race performance for since 2017 for the first time in NASCAR history. But it's never really quite the consolation to just finish second and by a few car lengths, but score the most points in the race because scoring the most points that doesn't get you the trophy, that doesn't get you the money, doesn't get you the pictures in victory lane. It's all about winning, and it's for all the flaws that NASCAR's current championship system does have, a lot of the coverage and a lot of the focus is now on winning the race, and I think there's something to be commended there. And so when Ryan says, we don't crown the championship by analytics, that's true. Analytics, we're just trying to quantify what we see. But at the end of the day, it's just at the end of the day, let me finish. At the end of the day, it's just whoever wins, whoever wins at the right time, who's ever at the right place at the right time wins, and whoever wins at the right time gets the championship. And that's just how it is. And we're here to watch it, and we're here to enjoy it.
Yeah, one thing that I wanted to say. Just a minute.
You go real quick because I was gonna talk for a little while about what I'm about to.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. The only other thing that I wanted to add from my end is that NASCAR is unique in the sense that it's an individual sport and a team sport at the same time. Like if that makes any sense, because you have the driver on the racetrack, that when he's on the racetrack by himself, he can't really do anything or get any help from anybody. He just got to drive the car and make the best he can out of it. And he's trying to be faster than the other guy and win the race. So in that sense, it's an individual sport, but it's a team sport in the aspect that he's driving a car that was built by a bunch of other people. And there's the outside factor also on the racetrack of pit stops and how the team performs on on pit road, how the crew chief calls the race, how the strategy turns out, and so there's like a weird factor. Like I would say, this this sounds silly, but like the closest sport I could think of in like the sense of NASCAR being the way it is maybe golf, and and I'm only saying that because that's a sport where you also face a lot of other competitors. It's not just one versus another person like tennis. Like tennis is an individual sport, but it's still just one person versus another person. Um, but golf is a sport where you play, literally over 100 other players in most tournaments, but you're also playing against the elements, the course, the conditions. So, in the same way that you're facing, the racetrack and you're fighting against it, you're also fighting against the competitors. But even golf doesn't have, like, just on top of the fact that it's nowhere near as athletic as NASCAR is. We've had that. There's been a bunch of dumb takes about that over the years when it comes to driving a race car, and I'm not going to get into all that here. But beyond that, that's just a unique thing that NASCAR has, a dynamic that exists that doesn't in any other kind of sport. And that's the biggest thing that makes it really hard to quantify this stuff, and also why it's just so damn hard to win. I mean, because, in other sports, like the best teams or the best players have a much higher win or success rate than you see in NASCAR. Again, except for maybe golf, just because like you've got like 150 guys playing in each tournament compared to 40 here. But otherwise, it's just that situation where there's so many variables and factors that you just don't have in other forms of sport, and that is what makes it really challenging for us to try to quantify this, and that's why it's almost impossible to really remove the randomness factor from it. But we still try here to do our best to just explain how we understand it and just give people a guide. Like, we're not trying to say that this driver is going to win here because of past history and blah, blah, blah. It's just a guide, and that's it. And we're doing this for fun. We're not trying to step on anybody's toes, but we just want people to try to understand what we're doing. And a lot of times, unfortunately, they don't. But there's a few that do, and those of you that do understand it, we appreciate that.
And you see it in every sport, though, where you have. I mean, there's an element of randomness in the playoffs, and can't just. I mean, I see people say all the time in other sports, if a team quote unquote chokes in the playoffs, they should blow it all up. They should start over. They should trade their best players. They should just, there has to always be something systematically wrong with the team. All time example lately probably is the Tampa Bay Lightning in hockey, who lost in the first round one year they got swept in the first round after they'd won like 62 regular season games. It was some historic sort of choke. And then next 2 years, they win 2 titles after people said they should have traded away their best players and everything. So, and then college basketball, which I do a lot of metrics for as well. I mean, obviously the NCAA tournament is one of the most random. I mean, that's why people love it, and I love it. But it's one of the most random playoff formats in sports, and that's why you have these big upsets like UMBC beating Virginia in 2018, which you could probably have simulated that game 100 times, and 99 times out of 100, Virginia wins. And, people are saying Tony Bennett, their coach, should have been fired for that because of one game. And very next year, they come back, they win the Final Four. So, yeah, for NASCAR, though, I think it's a bit different in that you will have the same groups of guys always contending, but results are still a bit more. I think this really leads me back to what I was talking about a while ago. The 2017 and the 2018 seasons that I recently been piling my data for, which it's funny, throughout that whole 2018 year, especially, it was all the big three, big three, Harvick and Kyle Busch and Martin Truex. Uh, but I think, and everybody was talking about Chase Elliott and Kyle Larson as being the young guys who, they weren't quite there yet. They still needed some time. They needed to learn how to close out races, and they were always choking. Which, again, I don't think choking is really a thing unless it's like some sort of clear unforced error, like Pablo Montoya speeding up pit road after dominating at Indy, or Denny Hamlin overdriving turn 11 at Sonoma in 2016. It's not a thing that like sustainably happened to somebody. And I found out in both of those 2 seasons, Chase Elliott and Kyle Larson were also both in the top 5, along with those other 3. In fact, Larson in 2017 was ahead of Harvick in third and was almost ahead of Truex in 2018. And Chase was 5th in both those seasons. So, the fact that those are now the 2 guys who are most recent champions, pretty clearly the 2 best drivers of their generation and the 2 probably best drivers right now, even if Larson is currently having a bit of a down season. That should not be at all any sort of surprise, because they were pretty much just as good as those other 3 guys, maybe very slightly behind, but Chevrolet was really struggling those 2 years. They were both really overachieving, and I think now that they have elite equipment, it's no surprise at all that they are winning as much as they are winning. So that was what I was going to just say about the latest seasons I've been compiling. Generally, they seem like they passed the eye test as far as at least like the champions are concerned. Last year, Larson obviously blew everyone away. 2020, Chase actually did beat Harvick by 1/100th of a point. So, I mean, that's one where you can totally go either way on that. And then Harvick now, I guess we can circle back around to him. Last year, when he didn't win any races, he actually ended up 5th in ETDR, which is probably higher than most people would have rated his season. But now he's the one who's kind of victim of Stewart-Haas Racing and Ford in general. The past couple of years have not been as good as Chevy and Toyota. And I think this year he has definitely dropped off more considerably this year than he did last year. But still, we're seeing that he can win races when he gets in the right situation and when the cars are fast enough. So yeah, it's really you're going to have with this playoff format and how random it is. A lot of times you're going to see different guys contend for championships, and you're going to see different guys tend to win individual races. But at the end of the day, it's volatility in results among drivers is not really something you see as much of in their overall performance. You will not. Cases like Brad Keselowski this year, how much he's dropped off, are very, very rare. Even then, he was not having that good of a year last year. Yeah, it's just you can't. I think that's really just the bottom line here, is that analytics really just kind of sniffs out these trends and balances out the volatility in the results a lot of times. So Harvick this year, I think, starting to trend back in the right direction now, and I think that's going to be reflected by the end of the year. So, David, you had something to say about that?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, well, no, that is a good point, right? And I think there's something to be said for how analytics sort of reveal what's going on behind the scenes, and I mean, volatility in the race results is a big reason why we watch. Like, I mean, there's a part of all of us who likes to see an upset winner, and just especially these days, it kind of throws a wrench into the playoff system. And I'm not one of those people who gets really bent out of shape over, if some guy who really shouldn't be in part of a championship chase, gets in because he got lucky at some race. I mean, I the championship in NASCAR for a long time has not really been determined by the best means available. So it's sometimes nice to just break it down and just watch at a race by race level. But back to Harvick, the comparison was made earlier in the episode. Right at the outset, to Tony Stewart's 2011, and I think that's the natural sort of comparison to make for someone like Harvick, who's suddenly found speed, seemingly. Whereas in 2011, Tony Stewart kind of a non-factor up until seemingly a non-factor up until the chase starts, and then he goes on an absolute insane run and then just walks away with the championship. Well, kind of squeaks away with it because he, of course, had a tie with Carl Edwards. But so what I did actually, he kind of had that discussion off, is I looked up some statistics today, and I thought I'd offer this by way of comparison between Stewart in 2011 and Harvick this year. So what I did, if I may be permitted to use driver rating as a substitute for ECDR, I mean, Ryan has not favored us with the advanced statistics for 2011 yet, but I'm sure when those come out, yeah, right. Which when those come out, those will be very revealing, I'm sure. But right. So actually, what I found.
I'll just say real quick, 2011, a lot like this year, I think, was a year where we had a lot of random winners.
Yeah.
A lot of random results. Races like Indianapolis with Paul Menard winning on fuel mileage, or Darlington with Regan Smith on old tires. It's like, that's definitely going to be a year I'm very interested to see what happens. And there was also just a lot of parity. I mean, you had like the top 25 or so guys were all drivers who finished top 10 on any given race, which was unusual for them. But yeah, go ahead.
The parallels are really striking, actually. The more I think about it, you have a number of first-time winners. You have 5 in 2011, and then you have let's see, I believe we had 17 total winners in 2011, which we're probably going to surpass that. I imagine. I mean, we're at 15, and I could easily see. I easily see us getting to 16 by the time of the playoffs start, right? So I'm just saying, of course, this is really neither here nor there. I mean, point is, there's a lot of similarities between the two seasons. We had, a lot of parity, kind of surprise winners. Actually, we had, first-time winners at the Daytona 500 in both years. But so anyway, so 2011, you have Tony Stewart, who's kind of flying under the radar, but the funny thing is, driver rating, in this case, which of course doesn't account for equipment strength, but it's just kind of more of a team rating. Before Stewart's first win of 2011, so basically throughout the regular season, because his first win was the opening round at the Chase at Chicago, Stewart had an average driver rating of 94.2. So that's interesting, and he had 7 races with a driver rating above 100. 7 races. Those would be Phoenix, Las Vegas, Fontana, Darlington, Kansas, Loudon, and Atlanta. And Las Vegas, actually, that's kind of a race people might forget about, because that would actually be Carl Edwards' only win of the season, right? And but this was actually a race that Stewart dominated, leading 163 laps, if I remember, or it was somewhere around that number. And he actually had a driver rating of 133.4. Which is surprisingly not the highest one of the race. In fact, Carl Edwards beat him out. So they both ran well in that race. So it was kind of a microcosm of the season, with the sole exception being who ended up on top. So you have that, and I think it's very interesting. At least, so you have 7 races in the regular season before Stewart wins for the first time, with a driver rating above 100, and 5 of those are actually above 110, and actually those same 5 are above 117. So you have the ratings between 100 and 110, but the next lowest after that group is 117. By way of comparison, Harvick has not, before the last 2 weeks, Harvick has not had a driver rating of 117 this entire season. So that leads me to my next point. Harvick, before he won at Michigan 2 weeks ago, his average driver rating was 61.1, which is actually kind of shockingly low. Yeah, so that's well, yeah. I mean, that's I mean, I was shocked too. Maybe I did math wrong.
That can't be right.
Well, it's up to well, I mean, it's up to 81 or it's up to 80 something now, right? But he actually had a race.
It wouldn't rise that much in 2 races.
Well, I mean, he had like a 28 at one race. But anyway, but you know, I'm regardless of what the average is, I might have the average wrong. However, he does have a driver rating. He had a driver rating above 100 in 5 races this season, and the highest one before the win at Michigan and Richmond, which I believe he had driver ratings in the 120 range these past 2 weeks. So his first is so his highest before that was at Loudon, interestingly enough, a few weeks ago. So Phoenix, Richmond, Sonoma, Nashville, and Loudon. But so okay, so that goes to show that Stewart's kind of on a different plane than Harvick.
Yeah,
or Stewart 2011 is on a different plane than Harvick. So then let me go on to this then. Setting aside driver rating and getting onto a specific raw stat was Stewart set a fastest lap in all but 2 races. So a fastest lap, that meaning, out of all the laps in the race, that there was at least one where he was the fastest car on track. So he set a fastest lap in all but 2 races leading up to his first win in 2011, for the regular season, and those 2 outliers being Pocono 1 and Michigan 2. So, and then for the total of those laps, for the total number of laps leading up to his first win, he was fastest in 5% of them. Harvick this year, leading up to his first win, he set a fastest lap in 14 of 22 races, and he has been the fastest car on track for 1.96 of all of those laps. So Harvick's been, substantially faster. If that stat's anything to show by it. Also, there's lots more to be gleaned, but I think my point's made. But if you look at, for example, top 15 percentage of laps in the top 15, you can just take a glance at the statistics on Racing Reference. They're just substantially higher for Stewart. Just kind of on a race by race basis. He has 2 races in the regular season of 2011 where he's in the top 15 for every single lap. Harvick had 1 before Michigan. And so it's, I think the point I'm trying to make it here is parity aside, because parity is, it was a big theme of both of these seasons. I don't think we're going to see a Stewart-like performance from Harvick. It's certainly plausible. I mean, it's certainly possible because, he could have a few.
Yeah. Can I jump in for just a minute?
Yeah.
Yeah. I just wanted to say.
Let me finish. I was just going to say, like, we're not likely to see it because it's possible, and with a few well-timed wins, he could, or a few well-timed good runs, he can find himself in the championship four. I mean, none of us really expected Ryan Newman to be a mere few turns away from the 2014 championship, but there he was. So I think my point is that the same as you guys, I think the whole Harvick as a championship contender is just a little bit overblown, but the media has to say something, right?
Yeah.
So go ahead.
Yeah. So on that note, I was going to say, I'll briefly just touch on the fact, if there's any season that this kind of one has a parallel to, I would say it's 2002, but we've already kind of talked about that in a bunch of episodes. I don't want to spend time on that. It was a different point system, different time. But as far as Stewart, I always felt like kind of what you were saying, like his overall season in 2011 was underrated, but the chase that he had was overrated. Because we have to remember, the wins that he got to start the chase off at Chicagoland and Loudon were both fuel mileage, which you could kind of counter that by saying that he probably should have won Phoenix, which he dominated, but didn't. They kind of gave that race away at the end. But still, you could say, law of averages that he would probably have 3 wins normally in that kind of scenario, and he was like a bit lucky in some aspects of it, but his overall season wasn't as bad as it also probably looked before that. If there's a Harvick season that I can see, or not his own season, but if there's a season that this one kind of parallels, like feeling wise to me, it would be like Logano 2018. If we're talking about an actual championship contending season, that as in contending under this system, which, as we all know, is not about being the best, but it's just about doing well at the right time.
Winning at
Like,
the right time.
yeah, it's like it's a better competition than that, but a much worse car that he's in. But just like a hypothetical scenario, like if we're talking about the real championship stuff in the sense the media is talking to, that's the one that comes to my mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this would not even be. I mean, there's always the chance that in the last 12 races he could improve, but Logano in 2018, his ETDR was 138.27. Harvick right now is 116.37. So, yeah, this would, I mean, it's not going to happen anyway, but it would easily be weakest title of this playoff era and probably of the whole modern era.
Yeah. I think the point I'm.
But yeah, I think. I mean, you pretty much said it with all of the stats you gave out. That Tony Stewart in 2011 was very unlucky not to win during the regular season, and probably very lucky to win 5 times during the playoffs. Even though this was Tony Stewart we're talking about, I think I've said it before. Probably the most raw, talented driver I've ever seen in my time watching. Who could just find another gear anytime he wanted to, and he certainly did then. But I mean, for XDW, the way it treats wins is that, I mean, they are inherently lucky because whenever you win a race, that's one win, and you don't. There's been no race that I've ever done where anybody has gotten an XDW of 1 for a race. So. That's how analytics have to treat stuff, and you can dominate every single race of the season, and you would be lucky to win all of them because bad luck just happens, and absence of bad luck has to be treated as good luck. So,
yeah, I think the point to be made with Tony Stewart in 2011 is that he wasn't so much bad during the regular season, unlucky, but just as much as he was overshadowed. Carl Edwards was being a consistency machine. Again, you have those, you have all those first-time winners. You have, have a number. Yeah, this is actually the first year of the wild cards format. So you have, you have drivers outside, between 10th and 20th to place in points, trying to get those 2 wild card positions, which is of course a prefiguration of things to come. But he certainly had his very solid performances, going into that, and going into the chase. And so, did he deserve the title as much as some others? No, probably not. I mean, Carl Edwards was kind of having a Matt Kenseth 2003 season, except arguably better, and maybe Harvick I think was doing pretty well that year, and obviously Jeff Gordon was on was kind of on having a resurgent year.
I kind of think that when all is said and done, I'm going to I would put a lot of money on Kyle Busch would actually be the one who would probably come out on top, but obviously he shot himself in the foot more times than you can count that year, culminating in Texas and being suspended. But he was the fastest driver that year, I think. Maybe not necessarily the best.
Yeah.
That was just a year just like this year where, nobody was absolutely dominant. Nobody had a season that you could say was one of the best seasons of the decade or whatever. Even Chase this year is it's a good season, but I wouldn't even say it's his best season. I think he was better in 2020 than this.
I'd agree.
Worse cars. And
yeah, it's really quite interesting. 2011 also, I think for a good long time, there was the driver with the most wins. Yeah, the driver with the most wins was Tony Stewart, and he got all those during the chase. And then the driver with the next most wins was Harvick, and he wasn't quite the consistency machine. At least his results are, at least his finishes of races are concerned, as Carl Edwards was. But it's even he. I mean, he was only top 10. If we want to admit that as evidence in this podcast, which is kind of dangerous territory, right? He only got top 10s in 19 races, which is just over half. So the parity, that's one part parity speaking, and then there's another part of just sort of not really having a sort of a dominant force that year, because Edwards, it's sort of a Matt Kenseth 2003 consistency machine, except this time it didn't work.
Yeah, and I actually find that Edwards year very overrated for that reason. I mean, it's like the same way I find, which I think you know what I'm about to bring up, but Jeff Gordon in 2007. Pretty top tens, but does what does that mean? He just didn't have very many bad races in a year where Hendrick was head and shoulders above the field. I mean, driver as good as Jeff Gordon should have been finishing top 10 every week that season. And Jimmy Johnson was more dominant in his wins and more dominant overall, was the much better passer, and he came out as better than Gordon for that season. And I think that's one people love to go on about, but the Latford system, Gordon was winning by 300 points or whatever.
Yeah, well, the Latford system is not that
both 2004 and 2007, Johnson had like a stretch during the summer where had a couple of DNFs in a row. It was like 3 and 4 races at one point.
Yeah, he had like three. He had like 3 engine failures in a row in 2004, I think, in the summer.
Yeah, and then 2007
couple of things.
He had
a couple of things I wanted to say on that. First off, it was more like the chase system than I would say the Latford system, because the race by race point system we've talked about it before, or I have, that it would probably be even worse. Like when it comes to just upgrading drivers for not having bad finishes, it might even be more of a difference with this one. The chase was like the differentiating factor there. And the second thing is, I agree that Carl's 2011 is a bit overrated, but I would still say that it's quite a bit better than Kenseth's 2003, because Carl Edwards still led close to 1,000 laps in a extremely competitive season that year, whereas Kenseth, I think, led like 50 after...
Not even 400.
Yeah, after like 50 after May that season, and like Carl was, he did only win one race, but he was probably very unlucky to only win one race that year.
He absolutely was.
Yeah, and so... that I'm not like disputing what you're saying. I do think it's a bit overrated, but I also, I think it's quite a bit better than what Kenseth was.
Yeah.
I mean, he had 6 or 7 second place finishes that year. It was like quite to 2015 Kevin Harvick levels, but it was like I remember. I mean, a bunch of them specifically were races the Daytona 500. He was right on Bain's back bumper at the end. Burlington, I think, is the one that's really the one that got away. He had Regan Smith on old tires, had 2 full laps to get around him and couldn't do it.
It's
Richmond.
Yeah.
Richmond in the fall was another one. He was like right there with, I think, Harvick.
Yeah. So I mean, you mentioned, you're right. I mean, Kevin Harvick 2015 levels actually. Carl Edwards had 7. I'm looking at it right now. He had 7 second place finishes in 2011.
If he had won any single one of those races, he would have been the champion, because
without a doubt,
even in the regular season, he gets bonus points for that.
Right. So he has so the races in question are Daytona, Bristol 1. You have Darlington. He finished second to Regan Smith famously. You have Richmond, of course, in the fall, and of course he ends out the year with 3 straight top 10, 3 straight second place finishes, right? And so that's like, and I mean, looking at the run that he had to close out the season, he had a 36th place at Michigan in August, but like starting at the Bristol night race, he only finishes outside of the top 10 once, and that's an 11th place at Talladega in the fall. So he has a pretty good run to close out the season. I mean, it could be part luck, that could be part whatever, coming on strong at the end of the season. But in a system like Chase, where you have it's just not enough, right? He had a great run to close out the season, but not a single one of those races was a win. And so, if he just won Fort Worth, Phoenix, or Homestead, Fort Worth, that's what RR calls Texas. So if he won Texas, Phoenix, or Homestead, um, you know, the history book would look different right now. But we'd have Carl Edwards, 2011 champion, and maybe he'd still be running NASCAR right now. But that's the timeline that did not play out.
That's just like an extreme example of so many of those races. I mean, obviously there's a driver's skill element involved in that. Most guys probably could have gotten around mediocrity, like Regan Smith, who was on old tires, 2 laps. But you look at those, it's like essentially flipping a coin 6 times and having it land on tails instead of heads every time, and it's just you can't count on that kind of just historic bad luck every time. I think and then on the opposite end of that, the top tens, you're not going to get 30 top tens in a season most years, because you're just going to have races where stuff goes wrong for you. And then I actually was just reminded of with you talking about this was this year we have William Byron with 5 top 10 finishes all season long after 24 races, which, if you look at his last 6 races, obviously he started off the season really well, dominated a few races, won a few races, was probably a top 2 or 3 driver for a while there, still second in laps led, which of course is inflated by the short tracks. But you look at him in the last 6 races, I tweeted about this yesterday, he has 0 top 10s in those 6 races, but he has 2 11s, 2 12s, and then 2 DNFs, were both races where Atlanta he was leading, he crashed, and then Indianapolis he was 3rd or 4th very late in the race, and he crashed. So he could very easily have 6 top 10s in those 6 races if he just finished 1 or 2 spots better or didn't get crashed. And instead he has 0. So it's like you're flipping a coin 6 times there. You would expect it to be 3 top 10s out of those 6 races, maybe.
Yeah.
Instead it's 0, and it's like, obviously, if he'd gotten a top 10 in all of them, that would be lucky. But the fact that it's just this, and this season has had so much of that. I don't want to talk about him too much this week, but like Michael McDowell with 9 top 10s in has he even had any races that he didn't finish in the top 10 in, that he even sniffed the top 10 at any point? It's all this stuff has to, you'd think it has to even out at some point, and this has just been a statistical anomaly of a season in so many ways, with polarized luck for so many drivers. So yeah.
I think it was someone mentioned maybe it was in the server a few days ago, but I don't remember. But top 5s and top 10s, you're getting at this. They're just kind of inherently arbitrary, and we use them, right? It's just like how we use them because you have to do it somewhere. F1 has podiums, right? They say top 3, and there's actually a practical purpose for those, because they actually have a podium that those drivers stand on at the end. But we just have top 5s, top 10s because we have larger fields, and it just wouldn't. It doesn't sound right to us, and in our minds to say top 11, so we use top 10 because
it's an easy round number.
Yeah, it's an easy round number, exactly. So if you do what I did recently. And I was kind of goofing around lately, and I was calculating mode finishes for a season. That basically, like, what position did a driver finish in the most over the course of a season? And I did it for like 2 seasons, and I didn't really pursue it very much. But it's like if you go through a season and then you find out that a driver has, you know, let's give up some ridiculous example, like 8 6th place finishes, and like
it's like Bubba in Xfinity that one year.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And then like 2 top 5s. I know that it really doesn't do justice to his season. I mean, insofar as already just looking at the finishes is inadequate, but then looking at a number in a column doesn't even do justice to the finishes. So it's that's it just brings it back to like what the point of all this is. You just have to have some sort of number that does justice to someone's
That's why
performance.
I think average finish is somewhat meaningful because it at least includes every single finish as opposed to just a certain amount of them, and doesn't treat 11th place as the same as 36th place. It's also I think the other kind of back to the whole Latford system argument, which I guess is now even worse with the non-stage point system they have. But people who take the whole point system stuff, full season points, who take that as that's who the champion should be every single year. Literally, all you have to do is just change the point system in so many cases. And that exact same argument is invalid. Like NASCAR had a point system where the winner gets 100 more points than second place. We would see so many more seasons where a guy like Kevin Harvick in 2014, I guess, who was very inconsistent, but probably the fastest driver that whole year. He did win the championship, but people think Jeff Gordon was the best that year, or some people even say Brad Keselowski. I don't know, best at ramming into people on pit road, maybe, but
just at spinning out on the Indy Roval.
Yeah. It's just like if NASCAR just had a point system that was more rewarding of wins and more rewarding of leading. For heaven's sake, bring back the lap sled bonus points.
Yeah,
absolutely. That's ridiculous that they took that away. I think it was kind of funny, back in those days, seeing like a back marker stay out during the caution and getting five
special.
Yeah, exactly. But and steps can be taken to curb that. You can only award bonus points for like a certain percentage of lap sled, but there's a certain kind of charm about that in the Latford system. Just seeing all those guys finishing in the mid to low 20s and getting these random 5 bonus points for a lap led. But it's the point system. Circling back to one of my first interests with these advanced statistics is just it's just so inadequate, and I think it's really actually better in many ways, better these days than it's ever been, because you have because of stage points. That's right. They're not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, and of course now because they're there, crew chiefs are strategizing for them. But at least they're there, and at least there's some way.
Can definitely be manipulated like that. Like at road courses, obviously they become very inaccurate.
Right. Yeah. And it's and so I'll keep this short, but it's just it's at least they're there, and at least there's some way to kind of quantify in-race performance. So if we had a better base point system, that properly framed and awarded finishes, and then like lap sled, and then stage points, we would have, and no playoffs, but that's never going away. We would have a really good point system, and we'd have a lot more champions that are frankly deserve to be there.
And that's where my average running position score comes from. Obviously, I mentioned before it originally originated as a point system project that I was working on, just like that, where it would be just rewarding dominance more and punishing drivers who are basically just top 10 or top 15 robots or whatever, and It's 500 for the winner, 400 for second, then 325 to 275, 250. It eventually gets down to 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 for the bottom 10. That's what I use for the average running position score, which just it correlates to whatever your average running position is, and that is what makes up 40% of ETDR. So I think that obviously being the biggest component there, it's not everything. There's passing and the equipment, but generally I think that's what separates it from driver rating and gives it much bigger, higher scores than that. Driver rating only goes up to 150. I think that's probably the worst thing about it is that it's capped so low that you still have the consistency bias because of that. So that's really biggest besides the equipment and the passing that separates ETDR from regular driver rating is that it's just rewards dominance so much more. But yeah, we've gone on about that long enough. I think
I just wanted to say one thing before we do that. We have like spent most of our time on the show talking about that. I don't guess that much more needs to be said, but I mean, do you guys want to talk about the specific like races the last 2 weeks or not? Or we can do whatever you want on that. We've got a little time left, but
well, we can yeah.
I admittedly didn't even watch all of both of them because I was with family all week, and then yesterday I was driving. I was coming all the way back from Cape Cod all day, so just kind of.
Yeah, I was so. I mean, as I mentioned, I was actually at the Michigan race, and first of all, the racing was fantastic, and I really enjoyed it. And of course, this was the first race, my first oval race since the Xfinity 2012 fall race at Kansas, and then my first Cup race since 2010 Kansas. It was now I'm just going to wax poetic about my experience, but it was a fun time. But it was
not in Kansas anymore.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. So I full disclosure, I am from Kansas, so but I'm not currently living there. So, yes, bring on your Wizard of Oz jokes right now. So, anyway, but yeah, the Michigan was an interesting race. Richmond was an interesting race. Both very much like each other, and that Harvick just kind of comes out of, I won't say nowhere, but he does kind of come on at the end, and then you have that little nickname that he was known by, Mr. Where Did He Come From? Thanks thanks DW and Mary McReynolds. But it's they were good races. I guess I don't have much to say about them. I didn't have the benefit of a ticker at Michigan. I guess there's a scoring pylon, but of course I wasn't looking at that. So
yeah, from my end, like the first part of Michigan was like it was kind of like just like a slightly better version of like the races there in the mid 2010s that weren't that good, but then it really picked up and it was really great from I'd say about lap 40 to maybe about lap 170. But then like the end of it was just a big swift punch in the penis. That's really all it's really needed to be said there. And Richmond, it was a popular race like among the guys in our server community yesterday. It's more of what I kind of deem what you could say maybe a boomer race, where like it's not necessarily like rife with action throughout, but there's some good strategy plays and some interesting little quirks in it, more than there is necessarily a lot of great racing action. Like personally, just like the spring race, a lot of it kind of dragged for me. And it did pick up some in the second half. I found that part a bit more enjoyable. And it was, I would say, probably the best short track race that we've had of the three so far, but that's not really saying a whole lot. But it's not one I'm going to be thinking about much after the fact for obvious reasons. But that's kind of my take on it as far as the general racing goes.
I saw a lot of people comparing it to the fall 2008 race, which I was at, and if I'd come back one day earlier this week, I possibly could have gone to that race. Jack, who we had on weeks ago, he went and was going to get tickets for both of us, but I couldn't make it, unfortunately. So yeah, it did seem like it was pretty good by normal Richmond standards lately. Multiple
Yeah.
grooves.
Yeah.
Michigan, though, I don't really see what everybody was hitting it up over, because to me it looks like a lot of single groove, a lot of arrow push, a lot like sort of what everybody would complain about with the 550 package. Maybe some of that was just Joey Logano being Joey Logano, but it really did seem like you couldn't really pass very well. I mean, Daniel Suarez, I think on one run, like stayed out and then held the lead for 30 laps. I guess partially because Christopher Bell was not being as aggressive as he could have been, but it was, I don't know, pretty mediocre race from what I saw.
Yeah, I guess that's fair.
Yeah.
I have generally low standards for racing. I'm just glad when I can catch them on TV. Fortunately,
I'm sure you probably caught more than the TV did. So
yeah. None of us expect like Richmond to be great because it hasn't been good in a long time. So it's not really like a big deal when it doesn't perform.
Yeah.
All right. Let's, I guess, move into picks for next week, or just anything else to look ahead to. I guess I'll go first. Seems like pretty much a slam dunk, although I'm probably going to jinx him by picking him. Chase Elliott, Watkins Glen. It's just, unless they like completely miss the setup trying to experiment around with something, I mean, this is playground. He won twice there and probably would have won last year if not for that whatever issue he had. I mean, he's easily the fastest guy there pretty much every year. So yeah, I mean, Truex is like usually the only other real competition there, and Gibbs has not been that good on road courses this year. So I think Chase is the obvious favorite.
You want to go, Jake?
Yeah, you go ahead. You go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I was kind of goofing around in our predictions game, and I picked Blaney because I think I said Blaney because why not? I want to hedge my bets and just say Elliott, and I mean that's certainly a safe pick. I mean, I guess I don't know. I guess Blaney. I don't know. Blaney's probably more likely to win on in Daytona in 2 weeks, but I think if realistically speaking, you could have, let's see, I guess there's Chastain, Reddick, Elliott. Larson won this thing last year. I might just go with with no points on the line in our game. I might just go with Chastain. He's you might have the entire field after him, but he might be. He finished 12th in this race last year. I think he'll be doing a lot better. Let's see what happens, but let's go with Chastain for the heck of it.
Yeah, for me, I would say the smart money is obviously on Elliott, and another, I guess you could say, decent pick for it that and my hope that that would be Kyle Larson. I'm jonesing for a Larson win right now, especially at this track. I really really want it. I had a term for it that I was going to describe, but I forgot it. But yeah, I'm.
Then, if you really want an Eric Jones win, is that Larsoning for it?
No, definitely not. Not the same thing. But yeah, I'm definitely ready for a Larson win, and I want to see him win on Chase's turf, and I want to see him actually get his head out of his ass and do something right now. But as far as my actual pick, I'm going to go for a little bit of chaos and say I think that maybe Chase Briscoe will come out of his hole this week and win. Maybe a wild event, where some things happen. But that's probably a little bit going out on a limb because Watkins Glen events don't tend to be that chaotic. It tends to be a fairly clean race where not, like we had at Sonoma this year where not a lot out of the ordinary does happen. But that's kind of my pick, I guess you could say. And it's not a pick, obviously, but I also want to, just mention the fact that we have a interloper this week, a fairly big one. Kimi Räikkönen is going to be driving a third entry for Trackhouse Racing in the number 91 car this week. I'm not a huge F1 fan. Like, I didn't spend a lot of time until like the last couple of years watching it much. But for the amount that I did follow it and did watch, Kimi Räikkönen was my favorite driver of the 21st century in F1, you could say. I was very sad that I missed his last victory in Texas in 2018. But he retired from F1 at the end of last year, which was pretty much about the right time. He was, pretty much starting to lose it. I definitely would like to see him do well, but I think at this point he's just kind of like too washed up to really do much. If this was 10 years ago, I think he could do well in this race, but at this point, I think he's kind of too old and doesn't have like the skills that he once had. I kind of just think he'll run around 20th like the whole race, maybe slightly better, slightly worse. I don't know. But it's a storyline to look for this week. Just wanted to mention that. That, I think, just about covers everything. So
I'll just make one more quick prediction, not for this week, but for Daytona 2 weeks out. I think we are going to get our 16th winner that week. I think I would almost bet my entire bank account on that. It just seems like so many guys just being so desperate. I kind of feel like most of the drivers who are already in the playoffs are just going to kind of take it easy. And it's going to be like between Blaney, Stenhouse, Buescher, Bubba.
Yeah.
You might get some real wild cards up there. Even Truex, generally not that great at big tracks, but I mean, it's going to be pretty wild.
I mean, if I were to make like an auxiliary prediction for this week, is that we would get our 16th winner this week at the Glen, just because the pool of drivers who can actually realistically pull that off is probably pretty small. Like, besides Blaney, which you really have Truex, who's won here before in the race that we all actually that's not that race, it's a different one, but. It's I almost want to say that we'll have 17 before the playoffs start, but that's one great thing about the season is that we've had a lot of different winners, and that's one thing I'm looking forward to seeing if it plays out. So in these next few weeks is just certainly if it doesn't happen Watkins line, like Daytona will certainly be it'll be a race for the ages. Maybe I'm overstating it, but it's going to be a lot of fun to watch.
Well, you guys have anything else you want to talk about or say? Or
no, well, I mean, yeah, it's been a lot of fun, and thanks for having me on. And
one very last quick thing: if the certain person from last week who got on our cases about not having a show is watching this, I hope you're enjoying Jennifer Jo Cobb's season right now. And that's it.
Well, okay then. Well, thank you, David, for being with us, being a guest. We appreciate you having you on. We'll definitely have you on again.
It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you. We'll definitely have you on again at some point. Thank all you guys for listening. This was another episode of the TRC Podcast. The TRC Podcast is Ryan, our co-host, main statistician, an analyst, me, Jake, the host, producer, and co-host and producer, and like secondary analyst. And like I said, we had David with us this week as a guest. I don't know if we're going to have an episode next week or not. Like I said before, we're kind of just in a stage where we're playing this by ear rather than going off of a set list each week. If we do have a show, I can't really say who will be our guest for next week. We're kind of just doing that on a...
Plus, I know Adam did say he would be back for the playoffs.
Yeah, okay, good. Yeah, but we are kind of like just a loose rotation this week, kind of just, having who we can get. We'll see how it works out for next week. But, if we can't find someone, we won't do a show. If we can find someone, it'll be someone good that we can talk with and have another entertaining episode with. I know this episode we kind of were a little bit off of our usual thing, like talking about the races week to week and whatnot. And I know that a bit of it, some of it was kind of dry, but we'll be back to our more of our usual thing next week, and be, I guess you could say, more, I don't know, chic and relevant with the times, you could say. But it is good to do these shows every once in a while where we go into the past and we talk about what the real point of the show is, which is the analytics. But you do have to talk about the current things too sometimes, and we'll definitely do that in the next episode. But for now, thanks to my friends here for being on the show and doing this. Thank all you guys for listening, and we'll see you next time.